you are here today to hear a little bit from T360 on the Swanepoel Trends Report on our leading chapter about the National Association of Realtors. You are in the right place. We had a pretty big response to this invite. We had hundreds and hundreds of people register, so we're going to give people a minute or two to get in. We're going to attempt to keep this discussion to about a half an hour. And so if you're doing some time planning, we're going to try to keep that right at the half hour. If you're just joining us, this is going to be a conversation from the Swanepoel Trends Report, the 2024 report just released in December, early release digitally in November. We're going to be talking about Chapter 1, which is the National Association of Realtors, and some of our critique and observation of challenges and opportunities with the National Association of Realtors. So if you showed up for that conversation, you're in the right place. We do have some things that we'll share with you at the end of the call. We are giving away this chapter to anybody that's attending on this webinar. So if you would like to read it, we'll be posting a link in here so that you can go and get a copy of that chapter at t3trends.com. Additionally, I'll post in a promo code. If you'd like to purchase the whole report, we'll post in a promo code towards the end of the webinar. So you've got that. And if you would like to purchase a report, all of our reports now are subscriptions. They come with digital access to all prior years' reports, and there's some really great material in prior years about everything in real estate. And you also get a print copy, as well as, of course, access to the current report, plus a lot of updates. We're doing a quarterly update on the trends, which is a change for us. We're going to be adding a lot more content into our trend subscription over the next year. So I have with me today Clint Skukon, who runs our practice in organized real estate. Clint is an industry consultant, has been working with us for about 5 years, consulting with organized real estate associations, MLSs, and companies connected to organized real estate, such as technology companies that work with the association MLS sector. Much of the commentary we have in the chapter came out of discussions with Clint and many of his clients and other people we're connected to in the industry. So welcome, Clint. Delighted to have you on board and to have some discussion about the National Association of Realtors today.
Yeah, happy 2024. I think folks are just rolling into the office today. So this is a nice one to just jumpstart everybody's thinking back to reality.
Yeah. Well, talk to us first about, I mean, you and I have had a lot of conversations about the association space, obviously, and many consulting engagements, we've done, and I know you've personally done work with the National Association of Realtors, with a number of the state associations over the years. I think we're, multi-year engagements with some of these associations and a lot of locals. So many of the observations came from consulting practice and some of the challenges and vulnerabilities that you've seen. So why don't we start there? Let's talk about, you helped write the chapter, you gave us a lot of input into it, and B, you also have had all that consulting experience. Talk to us about some of the vulnerabilities and challenges in the association space right now, and kind of what you're seeing from a person who's actively working in that space.
Yeah, I would say even many of these thoughts go back, more than almost 15 years when I was an association executive as well, having, seen some of these, things firsthand, kind of the building of the vulnerabilities over time. And so now, obviously with the events over the last year that are outlined in the chapter, I think, it's important to read this chapter with a focus forward, and to learn and to acknowledge vulnerability as an opportunity rather than as a critique. And I hope that's how folks take the chapter. I think one of the things, Jack, to start with is kind of a general advice piece for all involved with NAR at the state and the local associations. And that is this idea of, I think from the outside, it looks like there's a lot of groupthink that's occurred. And so, an inability at times to be, to think critically, to ask critical questions. I think that we're at a point in time where the items that are being discussed and the importance of getting it right moving forward requires us to ask tough questions. And so doing away with, the club mentality, don't question the club, just get along so you can move through the club. I think that has to move away and give way towards real, true leadership in the times that we're all undergoing. And some of that means, being very conscientious of the messaging that's continued, the idea and some of the, the imagery over the last few months, and I understand it's a changeover season. We want to celebrate new leadership, but when we put that so forward, and that's all that's being seen in a social environment, in an environment where members and others are looking to us at a time where they need some leadership, and all they're seeing are some of these celebrations of the individual over the challenges of the organization. I think those are things we have to be really conscientious as leaders within organized real estate in particular, but even, just leaders within the industry of being celebratory of those who are giving of their time during hard times, but also recognizing that it is a time to put our best foot forward, to be very business oriented, to focus on the industry itself rather than individual interests, and to convey that message through the pictures and words that we're using.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And I also know I also did a lot of interviews for this chapter. So I spoke to a number of people that have been in leadership roles, either volunteer leadership or serve on staff leadership roles. And so a lot of the critiques are things that you're saying right now, where it's like these are coming. Many of these came from people that have been with the organized real estate system for a long time and said, hey, we kind of know these are some of the challenges. So what are some of the other vulnerabilities that you think organized real estate has right now that have been either displayed through, the lawsuit or other things that have happened over the last year, or that have been evident for a long time? And what else do we need to look at critically about organized real estate?
Oh, I want to get to, I think there's a lot of focus on the litigative activity right now, and rightfully so, but I want to come back around to the DOJ and FTC considerations, which are linked, by the way, to the litigative activity. But before we go there, and that, because it's a little more of a deeper dive, I think this is something that I've heard through multiple conversations, whether they be, industry scale podcasts, conversations with our clients, or elsewise. But I think that there has been a failure over the last couple of years from NAR to really understand the importance of what I would call social cultural communication. So not just communications back to the member, but like the groundwork that was laid in a lot of these litigative cases by the opposition has been to communicate in a way that elicits emotion from the consumer. And that it just has been devoid by NAR. And right now, I think that has to change. They had a void at a very high level. The chief marketing and communications officer was just hired back in December. That's something that's really important, because while we want to and can lean into, I think, volunteer leaders to help with, some of the communications campaigns in a general capacity about the value of the realtor and all that, what is happening now and what is really important is it's not just about how you're communicating to your established membership, but rather what you're communicating and how you're communicating to the consumers, many of whom are going to be the deciding factor in a lot of these litigative outputs. But beyond that, I think they're going to be the ones who create the social cultural pressures, the political pressures, to allow NAR's voice and the industry's voice to be heard in the same manner and given the same importance that we've seen from the litigators in this case. Examples of this are, I don't think we've been strident enough about telling the story about the potential impact to home ownership, especially as it relates to younger members of our country, to minorities,
Yeah.
and even beyond that, specific back into the industry. We've done research that shows, younger and more diverse agents coming into the business come with the buyer sphere, because they don't have those folks in their sphere that are listing oriented. And so these impacts that are likely to really take a toll on the buyers from a consumer side are also going to have an impact on people who might want to see real estate as an entrepreneurial opportunity for them. And so I think these are things that we really should be out telling the story about, as well as really highlighting here. I think this is something that hasn't been done and needs to be done. We need to, as an industry, tell the story of, it's one thing to have civil litigation lawsuits that extract revenue from industries like tobacco and asbestos. It's another to remove literally billions of dollars from what is a core GDP component in housing, and in many ways sweep half of that over into what is the upper 1% with these litigators who are going to benefit from this. So it's one thing to extract real economic value and from one industry that doesn't have such a core impact. It's a completely different, and these are stories that I think we have to tell in a way that consumers can understand, and also, by the way, politicians. The firewalling that's occurred and the lack of leveraging NAR's strength, which is around advocacy and running political campaigns, to me is a bit baffling. And I think, again, it's a vulnerability if it's not rectified moving forward, Jack.
Yeah, it's significant. We have serious issues in housing right now. And this is the domain over which organized real estate should be running the show, should be controlling the narrative, should be setting and helping people understand that we have an inventory and we have a supply side problem. We have things that are keeping inventory, from coming on the market that could be a big help. And so this seems like an area where we should be running harder and be creating that narrative, and yet we're not. So I agree fully. Talk to us a little bit. You and I have talked a lot about governance structure as being kind of the root of many of the challenges, and I think that's where in our chapter we have some pretty aggressive suggestions around governance. And so let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I'll give credit to you, from our conversations. I know you spend a lot of time trying to do an evaluation of, somewhat comparable, if, entities, because it is a unique situation, and it is something we can talk about in a corrective. Again, I think solutions-based aspect is owning the uniqueness of, of course, the association, but in particular of the MLS. The MLS is really a unique situation in the fact that the association and the MLSs have been so intertwined. This is something we have to get right from a governance standpoint. And the decision making, as you point out, is really, really important to understand. And, I think, the size is just obvious. When you look at the size of the body at the NAR level, you look at that, you look at the capabilities of the core executive level leadership. I know that's really heavily outlined in the chapter, standing up what you see in the Chamber of Commerce at a national scale, and the capabilities and the experience of those advisors versus the capabilities and the experience of those closest to the advisory role for the National Association of Realtors, which, when you have a body of hundreds, the primary, advisors and decision makers really have to have, acumen beyond the basic everyday realtor member. And I think in order for an organization as large and ultimately as sophisticated as the National Association of Realtors needs to have that.
Yeah, and I did spend some time there, and thank you for acknowledging that's where I looked at who can we compare ourselves to in terms of governance structure. And I think the biggest takeaway for me, and it's in the chapter, we've got a side by side of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, similarly structured, chaptered organizations, hundreds and hundreds of local chapters throughout the United States, and looking at their leadership team versus NAR's leadership team. And the difference is very, just go on LinkedIn and start looking up the backgrounds of the people. You've got on the Chamber of Commerce side, you've got the former general counsel for GE, you've got the president CEO of Martin Marietta, you've got the former president of Caterpillar, you've got people that, and you look at their backgrounds, it's like, wow, you've got former state senators, you've got people that have been in staff and leadership roles in government, you've got like really diverse leadership backgrounds, which I think for a national organization is crucial, because it lets you look at policy, it lets you look at the way to move from a lot of different perspectives versus, and again, our volunteers are the salt of the earth. They're some of the best people in the industry that spend their time volunteering. However, their backgrounds are brokerage. And I just this morning, Clint, I just checked myself. I went and I looked up everybody on LinkedIn again, and I said, is there anybody here that has some other background? And the most diverse background we have of the current leadership team is commercial brokerage. So it's like we've got commercial and then a lot of residential brokerage. And again, great people, great service. They've earned their position in the organization, but it's the background that's lacking from the leadership team, and that extends throughout the organization. There's a reason there's an echo chamber. It's because we're all coming from the same house. We're all coming from the same thing.
Yeah, and again, somewhat why the communications functions and acts the way it does without maybe having a full, consideration for how do we engage the consumer in a way that moves them towards our industry, which, let's be honest, consumers in the country are predisposed not to like folks that are in a commission structure to begin with, it's an American thing. We're not used to that. We always are wondering what's their motivation for that. Do they really care about me, or are they just caring about the money? And so, that is something that I think, we talk about, we've heard a lot more about in MLS structures in particular. We need to bring in diversity of thinking and experience from those outside of industry who engage with consumers differently, engage with other ancillary and neighboring industries more, to hear that voice so we can think just outside of, like you said, our own echo chamber, and to have vision outside of our own tunnel, recognizing that there's some tunnels that run really alongside ours, and we can message in similar ways ways, but it has to be different based on the construct of that tunnel and that audience.
Yeah, there's some obvious missing gaps, like a voice around finance and mortgage industry, a voice around new construction and home building. I mean, those being part of the leadership team's perspective, those are obvious ones. Those are close to us. And then there's others that, you know, are not, maybe not as close, but could be. And so some of those are suggestions we have in the chapter about diversifying the leadership team from a perspective. So that's a piece there. A couple other points, and I think let's talk about solutions, changes, things that could be done. You and I have talked a lot about some of the challenges in local, especially local organizations where you have volunteer staff kind of, or volunteers kind of running the staff around and eventually and becoming too active. So let's talk about the challenge with volunteers and local, especially local staff, as it shows up for you.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here. One, you know, we're running a lot of these entities, and though members complain loudly, you know, we're running these entities on very small revenue lines. And in particular, you know, because we're in the midst of updating our almanac, so we see the size difference. You know, we have the Miami Association of Realtors that are clocking in north of 55,000, and then it goes down to literally associations that have tens of members. And you know, these association fees and even the MLS fees, by the way, are really not in alignment with the service provisions that are required, especially when the two are blended. When association and MLS are one and the same, like, you get these generalists trying to do what are very, you know, expertise oriented things, which one is advocacy. That's not an easy thing to understand and be effective with. And then there's the technology considerations, which are outlined in the chapter as kind of one of those failings when you blend the association and MLS together. And at the local level, yeah, that ends up where you have a ton of turnover, because first of all, there's not a lot of financial, you know, gain for someone to come in and run a volunteer structured organization. I always said, if you can get in a volunteer organization with, you know, turnover year to year going in the right direction as an executive leader, you could run anything, you know. And so it's a challenge to do that. And then you have, you know, many volunteers who come in there and again, whether they're well intentioned or not, many don't find the value or get the satisfaction, even in their professional day-to-day, that they get from the association. So they get overly involved in the association. Then they want to go beyond the advisory capacity. They want to act in an administrative capacity. They want to usurp or get in front of or between the executive and the staff, and or even in some instances they don't have staff, so that then the volunteers are trying to do the day-to-day work. So yeah, and this culture then bleeds up, right? Because as folks enter through and they learn about leadership and how to guide and advise, or to maybe not guide and advise, then they move through the system, because it's such a parochial system of promotion and relationship, and, oh, you have to have served on the board this many years in order to qualify as a leader. I mean, when I was an executive, that was something we stressed. It's not necessarily about your experience as a volunteer leader. It's about your experience as a business mind, as a
Right.
communicator, as a financial expert. What are those things that we can leverage? Because we have all sorts of folks flowing into this, you know, as an entrepreneurial opportunity from multiple other industries, because it's a second and third career opportunity.
Good. Well, let's talk about solutions, changes, things that we discussed, some in the chapter and some from your observations of working with the field. What are some of the corrections?
Yeah, and I think, Jack, this lends me to go backwards where I started to go a moment ago in terms of those vulnerabilities, which is really acknowledging and understanding the DOJ and FTC considerations, and some that I think we can project forward and say that they're going to make their way into some of these litigative directives or the injunctions that we're waiting to see. In other words, what are the directives that come out of the civil litigation suit that say you must, or you shall, or you should, or you shouldn't? And I think, you know, it's pretty clear that the DOJ and FTC have real interest in this, as well as if you look at the things going on around, you know, with Google and several other, it's not just real estate that's in focus here from the changes to the DOJ and FTC's approach. But I think there are real strong indicators that the three-way agreement is a problem. In other words, those who join the local are compelled or must be a part of the state and the national structure as well. And I think that's the federalist approach that you outlined in the chapter.
Yeah.
I think they're very clearly indicating that, you know, preclusion of compensation fields in the MLS is a priority. And even beyond that, I think they're starting to indicate the realtor ownership, exclusive realtor ownership of MLSs, where they preclude licensees from being able to access that MLS system, is really going to be in the crosshairs. And so that moves us towards the you know, the solutions based piece, Jack. And I don't know if you want to follow up on those observations or not.
No, we again, there's a lot about it in the chapter, but I think it's clear the intent is that anywhere they're seeing tying or seeing, mandatory relationships, that there's some challenges with that, and the industry probably will be challenged in those areas. And I understand there's a long history here. We're not trying to go into the history of, Thompson cases and kind of the states where it's required and the states where it's not. But it's clear that there's some intention by regulatory powers to look at those relationships as part of the cause of some of the consumer complaints.
Yeah,
And yeah, so
I think the reason I bring those up is because those are two entities that can strike change immediately through
yeah,
their declaratives. They don't have to go through a process. And so this whole
no,
idea of, oh, we've got 10 years in front of us, we don't have to worry about those things. Some of the messaging that is expressed in the chapter that caused frustrations for, I think, many in the industry, and did give a sense that NAR was behind rather than in front of these changes, lead to some of these thoughts. And so I think one thing, and I heard this one time from Katie Johnson, I want to believe it was at the Association Executives Conference last year from the stage, where she said, we need to acknowledge that we have what is essentially a natural monopoly. And so if you haven't looked into that, and there were gasps in the room, they're calling us a monopoly. No, a natural monopoly is very different from monopoly. Examples would be the NFL, the NCAA, subways, power grids, anything where the cost of building the infrastructure and those aspects are something that are so large and outside of scope that any single entity or groups of entities couldn't solve for that problem. I think the MLS is that. And I think that's why we do have the envy of the world, is because we have MLSs that are underfunded. We've done research that shows $952 million is the total revenue line for all MLSs in the country. If this were a privatized entity or entities, there's no way it's going to function in that way or in that manner. And so in order, I think, for us to move forward, we have to acknowledge that we are a bit of a natural monopoly, which means then there are different things that you have to do in terms of accountability, transparency, especially the FTC and DOJ. And so to me, opening up and thinking through, how can we work with them to create the transparency, the recording, the accountability that's necessary in order to do this. I think that's really important. Or if we're not willing to do this, then I think, Jack, we have to revert back to what you were saying and kind of outlined in the chapter, is that then acknowledge that this is a club, remove the compulsion to be a member, and open up the MLSs to everyone. And not only just open up the MLSs, I think that NAR and other, bodies, whether it be CMLS or RISO or others, where it's appropriate for them to chime in, need to not only talk about it, but compel MLSs to open up. Right now, 62% of MLSs are closed to realtor members. That does not work moving forward if you can't acknowledge that we are a natural monopoly and we have extra criteria. If you don't want that, then at that point you've got to open it up to additional folks and operate accordingly. And I think it's a role for NAR and others to demonstrate the value and address the false concerns of when you have a closed environment. In other words, only realtor membership to access the MLS. I'm from Colorado. I lived and breathed this. We had an MLS that was separated from the association for 20 years. We saw no financial revenue back against it other than tax in considerations, and it was open to non-realtor members as well as realtor members. And I think we have to pick a lane, one or the other.
It's well established that works. I mean, there are many MLSs that are run that way with an association that doesn't require membership in order to access the MLS. I mean, there are many, that model's been proven, it works. And
what it does allow for, though, Jack, is it does allow for differentiation of pricing to access. So there's still an ability to demonstrate value of realtor membership over, non-membership. So there's still, mechanisms there to recognize that the investment that's been made by the industry.
Well, in just the few minutes we have left, what are the highlights from your mind of the big, that's a big change, by the way. That one is a big change. What are some of the other big changes that we've recommended or that you took away in your read of the chapter?
Yeah, I think, it's very clear in the conversations, and I know you had this in particular, and we had a conference a couple of years ago where we asked folks about this, and, it was really, the associations need to return to their core services and stick to those and be really intentional about the advocacy work, the professionalism based work, the educational work, the creation, if you're going to be able to retain the three-way agreement of benefits that can be developed at a national level and brought back down to the local. Right now, I think there's too much local development and administration pushing to uphold the national and not enough value going back down in from the national to the locals. And it's created a divide in many instances, especially amongst members who don't understand that. So I think really getting back to those core services, and that lends itself to this next one, which is I think that NAR and others really need to be intentional about creating a toolkit and even doing a national roadshow. And that is not just for general purposes, but rather to really go and demonstrate how you truly separate the association from the MLS. And that goes from, the structural aspect, talking about
Mhm.
ownership considerations. I think realtor only ownership of the MLS is going to be something we have to address, whether we like it or not, is something that has to be addressed. So that's something, again, a national body of thought leaders can come together, start to outline, the decision making, moving these shareholder associations from direct to passive ownership. I think that's a really important piece. The strategies of clearly defining your core services as an association versus the core competencies of an MLS, and then down into the administration and operations of the associations and MLSs. Many have, set up for taxing purposes. Oh, no, we're separate. We have a for-profit entity that the MLS operates under. Okay, great. But you still have all the decision making. You have staff members that are generalists trying to do both. You have blended finances where revenue is going back and forth across the line all the time. And then there's the operational capacity where there are many folks that don't know what their specific role is, because any given day it could be I'm figuring out the chicken menu to now I got to figure out APIs and IDX feeds and all this. And so I think, a real concerted effort to do that. And even if it's not to that level, I think, doing a really good job around, when you have an event. So like at NAR Next, for example, last year, there was an MLS forum. And, there was this repeated mantra of what was going on with the litigation that was reported out in every single other committee. And to me, I was like, this is an opportunity to be sharing back. What can they do? Even if we don't believe that the outcome is going to change, what are the things that MLSs should be doing right now to prepare themselves for potential change? And, we've got a compensation shift preparedness pack that we've got where we're doing presentations to board of directors. We've got a checklist and then these are not like mind-blowing things, Jack. These are some things like,
Yeah.
do you know what percentage of your members really see themselves as buyer agents? What percentage of your finances are generated by dues versus non-dues revenue? There's some thinking that's just good general
Standardization
business
there. Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some standardization there, which I was surprised. I came really from the broker and franchise world and was surprised that we have some standardized metrics over in the brokerage world. I can talk lots about that, but in the association and MLS world, that there weren't. It wasn't like, okay, we don't really know percentage of where the income is coming from. We don't really compare it to other organizations as a practice, right? So that's big. So before we
Jack,
wrap
I've
up,
got a couple. Yeah, I was going to say
couple
before we
more.
wrap,
Yeah,
I've got one other. I just want to throw this
one
out
other.
there. It's an innovation concept, and a lot of times it's under uncertainty and duress, like the nature that we're seeing now. That innovation comes forward, and I think that some leaders within the industry, whether that's brokerage leaders, whether it's mortgage, the industry as a whole, if we really start to rethink what we know today, I think there are some better models moving forward. One concept would be to reverse engineer the MLS and association relationship. Right now, it's the association and the MLS is underneath it. When you look at what the members value, what the consumers need, an MLS forward, approach where the MLS is the primary collector of fees and revenue, and then disperses back to the association as a nonprofit entity. The coordination opportunities, the solidification of, revenue, more predictable revenue lines, because there's going to be a lot of revenue uncertainty with change in membership. We're starting to see that in our numbers that we're tracking. But more importantly, I think it would be a way to incentivize realtor membership through the MLS participation, offering discounts for those who become realtors rather than charging more for those who aren't. So it's just a shift in mentality. And I think that's an innovation concept that, it's just one of many that could come forward from this. And the final thing I would say, Jack, is, and I think this really goes back to all of us in the industry, stop leading with popularity or a student council-esque approach. We have to really think through and be leaders, and what that means. And I spend a lot of time in association and MLS rooms where the volunteer leaders are afraid to do something that will cause failure. Right now, the biggest thing that's going to cause failure is inaction and
Yes.
worrying about the popularity of the decisions that you're making, because we as leaders should be ingesting and thinking more about what's coming and getting in front of that than what the general member is. They may not understand it, they may not like it, but this is what true leadership looks like under duress and uncertainty.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is in its own way a republic where you have leadership elected to be decision makers and to represent the body and to make decisions that aren't necessarily popular, but necessary. And we have example in the chapter. We have many examples of times where an unpopular decision was not made, but should have been, and it would have prevented whatever scandal, breakdown, significant problem happened. And it really does go back to leadership. So and incidentally, the one issue you brought up about pricing and how to handle member versus non, that's we had several questions come in about that. So I just answered one of those privately, is that, and I love that concept of saying, hey, if you're a member, you get discounts on these services provided to the MLS that help maintain the MLS's margin and ability to produce the service at a high level. So I think it's very smart and just a little different thinking to it, a little different approach to it. So before we wrap up, a couple of things that we'll share with you. This chapter on the association structure and NAR is available as a free chapter on t3trends.com. You can access it now. If you go to, Chris Riley just posted the long link in there. The short link for it is t3trends.com/NAR, t3trends.com/NAR. Feel free, go to the page. It says register. If you're a new user, just register, and then you'll be sent an email with instructions so that you can get into the site. You'll be able to read the free chapter. If you do want to purchase the report, which again comes as a subscription with access to all of our prior trends reports, as well as immediate digital access to the full report and a shipped printed copy to the address that you ask us to ship it to. We have a coupon code for it's 20 off solo. I think if Chris Riley if you can post that into the chat there, it's 20 off solo. That's for a single report. If you're buying more than one, we have another code, 20 off team, which is the same, 20 off instead of solo, put 20 off team, and you can get multiple reports. Clint, I know you do a lot of work with associations where they will order multiple copies. You'll come in. It forms a really strong backdrop for the consulting and the work that you do. So love the questions. Love all of it coming in. We didn't allocate time for a ton of Q&A today, so we're going to have to move on. But we will be doing a few more of these on the Swanepoel Trends Report over the coming weeks. I'll also say we have a LinkedIn Live tomorrow that is on brokerage-related topics. Keep an eye out for that from the T360 LinkedIn. And then we will be hosting more buyer brokerage Q&A sessions for those of you that have been involved with the buyer brokerage program that's concerned some of the compensation changes related to the lawsuits. Those are happening every Friday for anybody that has purchased a buyer brokerage action pack, which is available on t3trends.com. Again, you can add that on to a T3 Trends subscription that includes the Trends Report as well. So Clint, thank you again for your time today. Fantastic. I think this was a very bold chapter. I was delighted to work with you on it. I think there's a lot of good thinking in it. And I know we could spend another hour on it because of how much material that there is and that you and I have in the research we did from that. So again, thank you for joining us today. And I will see everybody else on our future calls on Swanepoel Trends Report chapters. See you at our next one.